Okay, let's do some viewer comments. A lot of these come from a video I had posted just today. It's called, What Does It Feel Like to Lose a Self? When I make videos about no self, it's almost certain to be triggering for some people. Some people get mildly uncomfortable. Some people get really triggered by it. I didn't put a trigger warning on this one, interestingly, but it just happens. It's an uncomfortable topic for the self. If there's a sense of self, a strong sense of self-structure, agency, and so forth, it's very, very threatened by messages like this. Yeah, or can be for sure. Let's see. First comment. This one's from Ooh La La. Thank you for being clear about this, but sometimes even you make it sound like it's a big deal. That sounds to me like a really big deal, and that you say quite obvious. Yeah, is the realization of no self a big deal? As I mentioned in my book, there's a chapter on paradox. The deeper stages of realization that you traverse, and trying to talk about these deeper stages of realization, things get very paradoxical. They just do. That's why one of the earlier chapters in my book is the chapter on paradox, just so you can sort of realize you're not going to be able to reconcile a lot of things early on. You just won't. Certainly not intellectually. So, is it a big deal? In one sense, it's not at all. In one sense, it's actually a very small thing just kind of disappearing, or a very small thing suddenly being seen through. Like a certain kind of illusion is just suddenly not there. It's just nowhere to be found. The implications are pretty big. Now, there is something that's very interesting about this, and that is some people do find it really not just triggering. They find it kind of devastating when that happens for a short time, usually not long, maybe a few days, maybe a week, maybe, and there's an adjustment period for sure that can take weeks to months and so forth. But some people, myself included, and I interviewed Kevin Shanelek about the fetters and so forth, and he had the same experience. It was just like funny. It was like funny, but also completely natural. It was like finally living in a natural experience. Finally not living through a lens of artificiality that's always applying itself to every experience. So is that a big deal? Well, there's no one there for it to be a big deal for, to put it in one way. Another way of saying, is reality a big deal? Reality is just what it is. It's super straightforward, actually. Is it a big deal to the dying ego? Yeah, I guess it can be. But regardless of any of that, you don't have to imagine how big of a deal it is. You don't have to imagine it's a big deal or no deal, or you don't have to understand it. You don't have to have a model for it. In fact, the tendency of the mind to try to model things ahead of time is really like a coping mechanism. It's actually trying to keep itself stable, right? So any really direct message about no self, the mind is not going to like that. Some part of you just won't like it, but that's okay. What's going to come up are going to be barrier emotions, right? Fear, anger. And then there's probably an associated shame, helplessness, fear of helplessness. These things come up with this kind of pointing. And even those don't mean that you don't have capacity, that you've gotten something wrong. They just are the entry point, right? When boundaries start to disappear in experience, then there's no way to section off certain experiences. And if we've been sectioning them off, repressing them for many years, they're going to come. So it's actually normal that these reactions come. It becomes a little unfortunate when, instead of really feeling the emotions, on occasion someone will kind of get a little, argumentative, or kind of talk themselves out of the doctrine as they know it, or think I'm overstating something, or think I'm just misleading people. Like, I get these kind of almost defensive comments sometimes when I talk this directly. And those are just coping mechanisms. But you're much better to just not make conclusions yourself, including conclusions about what you think I'm saying, and actually feel into what's going on right now. Right? That's always the answer. And if you get clear enough on what's going on right now, this realization will hit at some point, unless you really fight it. And people do fight it, but I know many people who didn't. So anyway, I'll read the rest of the comment. Even though I've been at this for years, I think that was a typo. I was just expressing to someone yesterday the difference between having this as an aspiration and the regular illusory goals of life. We can often have at least some inkling in our imagination what some of those other experiences are and actually hold them out to ourselves as incentive. But as you say, there's nothing that we can imagine to aim at. That's right. Exactly. Imagining, using the mind to project into the future, to imagine time, to remember yourself. All of those are kind of coping mechanisms as long as there's identity wrapped around them. They're coping mechanisms to not face the total dissolution of self. That's all they are. They're not good or bad. They're just what's happening, right? Rest of the comment says, I guess some people have experienced this through psychedelics. You can have very extreme experiences on psychedelics. And as I've explained in other videos, this isn't about experience, but you can definitely get a taste of non-duality and even no self through psychedelics. Which doesn't necessarily mean that they experience it again without the drugs. Well, that's the downside is often it can be very episodic, and it can, at some point, it can start to even reinforce a kind of ego, because you're the psychonaut, you're the journeyer, and you keep those experiences conveniently kept away only in the times you're doing the substances or medicines or whatever. So they can be valuable, but they can also lead to issues until you're ready to really take this on totally vulnerably and totally sober. Okay. Good comment. This is from Ilana, I think. Reinitiation connected to the dead who live in me and the living who die in me. Thanks to you. What a surprise in my age. LOL. Should I look for the unborn? I'm not sure what all that means, but it's very poetic and beautiful. Then this is from Martin. Martin says, it's all fun and games until someone loses an I, meaning the letter I, capital. It's true. Fuck around and find out. This is from Angel Moon. I got a little heart. I got a fire. I got an explosion and a little star eyes. Emojis. I do speak fluent emoji if anyone's, not sure about that. This one comes from Kyle. This has happened to me around Christmas, and every single day since then has been legendary mystical perfection. Right? Svaha. It just keeps getting better. I've never been this high. I can't thank you enough. You're welcome. You were the most authentic, best teacher I ever had. Your pointers are always so clear and helpful. I'm glad they are clear and helpful for you. Not for everyone, but I find that it tends to work when people are really, really open to the process. Pay attention to the cautions I give, not putting it on me. It's your journey, your process. You're letting go until it's not even yours anymore. Until the experience gets so direct and fundamental that you can't say there's something experiencing it anymore. But awesome. Really glad to hear it. This one's from Wesley. I have been an ardent student of the path for many years. I have to say, when I hear you talk about this, when I hear Adya talk about how he died, and in the End of Your World interview audiobook with Tammy, I get frustrated. So again, as I was mentioning before, I'll read more of the comment, but as I was mentioning before, that's totally normal. It's normal to hear this and get triggered. Now the mind may be saying, oh, I'm frustrated because I haven't gotten that yet, or I'm frustrated because at the end of this, it's going to be a disappointment. Neither of those are true. Those are the mind's version. The mind cannot hear this. The apparatus of selfing mind. It can't hear what I'm saying. I'm not talking to the mind. I'm talking past it, right? And it does land somewhere. It's just not in the mind. So the mind is going to go on tilt with this stuff. It won't like to hear this. And just hearing it does tend to soften and dissolve boundaries. And when that happens, repressed emotion comes up. So you may get frustration, anger, resentment, regret, all the things. And those are fine, totally fine. Okay. I'll read the rest of the comment. For many of us who are dedicated and sincere, this path has meant upending our lives. Yeah, it can, for sure. I will say that the spiritual unfolding process, for lack of a better way of saying it, it doesn't equate to dysfunction, though. That's a misunderstanding. If someone's life is in shambles, And I don't mean because you had a recent death in the family or something where, it's a temporary situation, but if someone's life is just in shambles and they're terrible coping mechanisms and they don't function well in multiple areas of their life, that's not where I prescribe awakening usually. I would say, look at what's really going on. Like, is there an addiction? Is there a psychiatric issue that's not being treated? Is there a part of your life you really just need to develop and get yourself to some kind of relative stability before you work on this? I'm not saying that's you, but I just want to be clear about that in general, that I am a kind of strike while the iron's hot kind of person. But if someone's life has really just been upheaval their whole adult life or something, I may be more inclined to tell them to really look at what needs to be, get some directed energy, some directed attention, some directed work, and really clean something up if it's just endlessly distracting you or causing you to be dysfunctional, harming yourself, harming others, any of those things, right? Again, I'm not saying this particular poster is doing that, but I just want to be clear about it. I'm going to read the rest. We put in years, thousands of dollars in retreats, sessions, healing, many hours in inquiry, many thousands more in clearing out the frozen energy backlog in the body and consciousness. We forego short-term pleasures and seek out the dark, deeply uncomfortable, painful places in our experience. That's awesome. It is a central and major movement with sacrifice after sacrifice. Yet the path leads according to certain trigger warning videos you have made, Adya, others, like you didn't mention it, but Buddha, for instance, not to a great payoff for giving our entire life to it, but to a horrific experience of total death, gut awakening. You call it gut awakening. I think that's an Adyashanti term. But when you say it's a horrific experience, again, that's like you're extrapolating something onto an experience that is not clear for you yet, right? Or a realization that's not there. For you, it may not be like that at all. You don't know that. And if you've done this much shadow work and you've been crawling through hell your whole life, you'll probably find it pleasantly enjoyable. Like the previous comment I just read, it can be, it can be any different way when the shift happens. But as it integrates, it comes to a very peaceful place, a very different kind of living that you would never ever trade for anything else, even if you could. So, yeah. And then the rest of the comment says, doesn't that seem wrong to anyone? Well, here's the thing. You can crowdsource this all you want, but it's not about public opinion. That's the beauty. That's the beautiful thing about realization. It's not about public opinion. It's not about Dharma opinion. It's not about any Sangha or teacher's opinion. It's not about the opinion of the doctrine. It's only about direct experience. So where I speak from is direct experience only, because that's what matters. And through the direct experience, it gets so clear that anyone else can actually realize this if they're really willing to let go. So what do you have to let go of? Well, a big story here. I'm not saying it's not a true story, but it's a story, right? That all the sacrifice, all the work, all the effort to extrapolate something in the future that's going to pay off, right? This is why I think like Tony Parsons and Jim Newman and that style of speaking can be really powerful for spiritual seekers sometimes. It's when you're really doing a negotiation with the universe. Like, I've done all this work, I've done this, I want to get what I want to get. This is not law of attraction. It's just not. What you get is truth. That's all you get, right? Just like Morpheus said, all I can show you is the truth. You want it or you don't. And this is also why I put cautions in my book to really introspect, like, what are you trying to do here? Turns out the truth is rather lovable. I'm quoting someone, I can't remember who it is, but turns out the truth is rather lovable. But yeah, if you intellectualize no self from a self, it's never going to sound good. But turns out to be a very enjoyable and satisfying way to live. That's it. There's more to the question, but it's essentially that. I'll read the last part. It says, I know we are supposed to see it as a great liberation. I don't think you're supposed to see it that way. I don't think you should see anything in any certain way. You should not form. I don't even want to should you on this, but I'm not inciting anyone or inducing or suggesting anyone forms a way that you're supposed to see something. That's not what this is about, right? This isn't about getting the biggest cookie in the world or a bigger cookie than other humans got because they didn't work as hard. It's just not. It's not that world. In the relative world, it does work that way, right? If you do what others won't do, you will succeed often in those areas that you're doing the work in, right? That's relative. You could say law of attraction, but less than law of attraction. It's more like law of effort to me, focus and effort. That does work in that world. It doesn't work in this world. You have to see through that because that's laced with fear, identity, addiction to the illusion of time, addiction to the illusion of reward. There's a lot in there, right? So everything here, you can read it here and see for yourself what is holding you up. It's all that. You have to let go of your ideas about realization, period. Even if they're the really fearful ideas, even if they're really wonderful ideas, you have to let go of them to really know in a way that doesn't require thought. That's it. I mean, I'm being direct, but it's kind of a long question and it's pretty laced with like heavy stuff. So I wanted to be honest about it. And yeah, it doesn't concern, like your concerns here don't concern me because nothing's really gone wrong, but you seems to be at least telling yourself a story of this like massively painful journey and that it has to pay off or it should. And if it doesn't pay off in a way that you think it should, it's not worth it. But again, you're trying to a priori understand something there's no way to understand. It's all about experience, especially no self. It's experiential or nothing else. So, yeah. So I could say there is a big reward at the end of it. But then that sets up another kind of seeking. So I'm better to just say it's really ineffable, but it turns out okay. Yeah. Thank you. Someone commented on their comment and said, "You fall into the trap Angelo is describing in the beginning of the video. I'd suggest to rewatch it." Yeah. He says, "You clearly have an idea of no self, total death. That's a view called annihilationism." I love it. Yep. Yep. No self is not a view and you can't grasp it in any way. It's non-grasping, non-clinging, non-craving. Yeah. Very good. All right. Someone else made a comment here that said, it's actually a pretty good answer too. "I want to challenge you to consider the difference between giving and offering. Giving is an act that asks for nothing in return. Offering is an act that is made for an exchange. You offered all of those sacrifices hoping to gain something in return, but did God, karma, or the universe agree to the terms?" Yeah. It is like that. And I don't want to beat up the original poster on this because everyone's going to have some degree of this early on. You're just going to. You're going to have self-centered ideas and views. It's just going to be there. It doesn't mean that's the only thing that's happening. But yeah, it can be a distraction when you really believe like, oh, it's transactional, right? I'm doing all this for what I think I'm going to get later. Just consider the possibility that that's not why you're doing it at all. That's just what your mind is saying. Just a bunch of thoughts. You know, the Dharma vehicle is infinitely flexible and it can move through anyone at any time. And it doesn't care if there's thoughts or not thoughts or how much of a story you're telling yourself. It's still, the unbinding is occurring, almost certainly. So, yeah. Okay. Moving on. That was a long discussion of one comment, but it was a good one. This is from Krinos. "You say it's instinctually obvious that the infinite circuit, did I say infinite circuit? Is far more interesting than the tiny little self." Sometimes I wonder when people give me these things like, did I actually say it just like that? I don't know if I did, but there is no tiny little self. So I might say something like, anyone, everyone I know who has realized non-dual clarity, like realized non-dual. I don't mean a glimpse of it. I don't mean unbound consciousness. I don't mean one mind. I don't mean any of that. I mean truly realized non-dual. I don't think any of them would say that it's not pleasurable, that it's not enjoyable, that it doesn't have a deep, satisfying quality to it, that it's not fascinating, and certainly that it's preferable to the suffering sense of being a mind-identified self. There's just no comparison. So I don't know what else to say about that. And then the same person said, "I honestly think that's craving, and many teachers warn against reifying non-duality." Many teachers have not realized non-duality, period. They just haven't. Depends what you mean by non-duality. But if you mean non-duality in the way I do, it means to see through the fundamental illusion of separation, form, perception, distance, time, space. When you see through those, if you've seen through those, why would you warn people against that? It doesn't make any sense. unless it's fear, unless they're actually experiencing the fear of letting go to that degree. But the experience of non-duality, or the realization of non-duality, it just is. It's not about craving. It's just here. It's the nature of reality is non-dualistic. So I would say that actually, finally, when you realize non-duality, this deep sense of craving, hunger, seeking, and this stuff, intellectualizing, all of that is finally settled. Finally, you really know peace. You know what peace is. So yeah, it's not about reifying or not reifying non-duality. Non-duality is. If you're reifying it, you're probably intellectualizing it, which means you haven't realized it, or you haven't fully realized it. You've maybe touched on it or touched into it experientially. But how do you reify something that just is, right? So I think you're maybe misinterpreting what I'm actually saying, or not realizing the degree of realization I'm pointing to here. The rest of the comment says, Alan Watts calls it trading the traditional handcuffs of the material world for golden handcuffs instead. So I don't know this quote from Alan Watts, but I'm almost certain I know what it's about. What he's talking about is essentially spiritual bypassing, right? That's not deep realization at all, right? That's trading spiritual seeking for a materialist seeking, right? If we're talking about non-dual realization, the seeking has subsided. If the seeking hasn't subsided, you're still working on earlier aspects of realization. Haven't made it past Kensho, probably. So yeah, I think that's not at all what Alan Watts probably meant there. Then it says there are countless other warnings. Yeah, I think my suspicion is this is, again, watching a video like this is triggering, and it can really freak you out. Like, I've seen people, not just with no self, but with non-dual, when you start to experience the whole entire environment completely replacing you, it can be really scary at first. And that can be triggering, right? And so an easy way to sort of sidestep that is to go up into your mind and be like, oh, that person's reifying something, or reifying non-duality, or whatever, misapplying a principle or something. But with the realization of non-dual, it's very stable. It's a very simple, stable realization that's not equivocal. Yeah. Let's see. Then the last part says, instead, it's all equally empty. What do you think? Maybe you're reifying emptiness? I don't know. It sounds like you have a sort of intellectual grasp of this more than direct experience, but I don't know for sure. I would say anyone I know who has truly realized non-duality, they get what I'm talking about. That's all I can say. I don't know. Yeah, so there's another part of the same person's comment. I can kind of see where they're tripping themselves up, or at least what I would say is tripping yourself up. It says, non-duality is not a finish line. I agree with that. I believe it's the starting line to see the emptiness of all contents in consciousness. Now, that's an earlier realization. That's more like one mind and the ability to utilize unbound consciousness, but it's not a stable realization because it's not non-dual. Non-duality is actually a fundamental shift in perception as far as the sense fields are concerned. It's not about consciousness. It's not about mind or thought. Yeah. All that's important stuff to do. It's important to do that work, but I think you're kind of putting the cart before the horse a bit here. All right. This is from Macaroon. LOL, that little switchover happened to me this past weekend. A tremendous amount of okayness is here, but also a tremendous amount of uncertainty and discomfort. But it's clear that the uncertainty is just there because the mind is looking for certainty that is less certain than this. That's right. Awesome. So yeah, it's fun to make these videos because I do. Some people are going to get triggered, and it's just like it's a little too direct, and then other people, it's like helps with the shift, or they can sort of relate and they post about it, which is really fun to hear. So this one's from Vipra Lipsa. Hi. Yeah, I'd say invest time into studying Antakarana. I think that means mind, big mind, like mind with a capital M, like the Buddhist word would be mind, which again, as I've said a few times here, this is an earlier realization you're talking about. I don't mean to sound elitist or anything, but I try to be really precise about this stuff. And many, many, many spiritual teachers out there, if they've had an awakening, and many haven't, but if they have had an awakening, it's often the first awakening, and they look at everything through the lens of consciousness and that big end mind, and the I am sense. Another way of saying this would be the I am sense. So I get comments a lot that are like, when I'm talking about no self, they're like, oh no, you need to look into I am or something. And it's like, well, that's really much earlier insight. Just FYI. Okay, this one comes from Shadow Zur. Video summary. Awakening is beyond words, but Angelo's words and experience are actual, all caps, no self. And your words and experiences are actually just self. And then they said, haha, poop emoji. This is playful banter, by the way. Yeah. The funny thing about this is, like, I can see how an ego or mind can project onto a discussion of no self, but there's no sense of it being special, and there's no sense of it being Angelo's or mine, or it's not like that at all. It's like that's the point. That's the point of what I say is, not only is it your birthright, it is the actual truth. The actual truth is that you will not find a self. Buddha said it like 400 and sometimes in the Pali Canon. You won't find it. And if you keep looking in the right way and look at other fundamental perceptual filters, you will realize these insights that I talk about. So it's available to everyone. And the part about my words being right and others are wrong or anything, my words aren't right. The words don't touch this. They're just pointers. It's just a bunch of pointers. And I do it in any way I can think of. I interview people who've gone through it. I work one-on-one with people when I can. I do it in retreat settings. I really try to offer all the different angles on this stuff. I recommend other teachers. I interview other teachers. So I'm trying to give people as much resources as they can, because it can get subtle. The stuff gets subtle and it can be slippery. And if there's an avoidance of shadow work, that's the big elephant in the room for a while until you really get what that means. But certainly not elitist. There's nothing elitist about this. I want everyone to wake up, all of you, and because I know it's possible. So, yeah. And then someone said, definitely going to get this comment hidden. And then someone else said, more likely to be highlighted than hidden. I don't think I'm gonna do either. Okay, next comment from Boris Bortrude. This one was on target. I'm still largely mind identified, but I'm definitely getting drawn towards something I can't describe. Awesome. Yeah, that movement towards the in a sense, the ineffable, that movement toward mystery, that movement directly into the unknown, and the sudden instinct that's like, oh shit, I can reify here a self or a way of being or a coping mechanism. I can distract, even a spiritual distraction, or I can really just face this unknown, and you will immediately find the emotions that are associated with it, and then just keep letting go. Nice. This is the same poster above, Shadow Zur, that's answering someone else's comment with long paragraphs. This always makes me a little, when somebody's like trying to teach someone else in the comments, and sometimes their pointings are okay and other times they're kind of off. Yeah, I don't agree with this long comment. A lot of the things in it. Oh well. Okay. Mikey Finn says, what kind of knowing is still there when you don't give thoughts any voluntary attention as they pass by? When you drop subtle thoughts that give meaning and context to you and whatever you take your situation to be, including meditation? Yeah, that's a great question. I think he's just restating a kind of koan. That's a good way of orienting yourself. Yeah. Let's see. This one's from Cindy L. Martinez. The more I listen to you, the more it seems to soften my experience. The doubt feels prevalent, and I never know where or who I am in this. Beautiful. That's someone who knows how to surrender. It's not that you know how. It's someone who resonates with surrender, who gets what surrender is, instead of getting all intellectual about this stuff, arguing about doctrine. It's like, just feel it. Just feel where I'm pointing. That's all it is. Then this is from the Wizard. Thank you. You're welcome, Wizard. Love it. All right. This one's from Kate. So helpful. Thank you, Angelo. I'm connecting more and more to what you're saying. Such a beautiful unfolding. Good to hear it. Okay. Boy, I think that was all the comments from that video. That was a lot of comments. I think what I'm going to do is answer a couple other comments that are not in this video specifically. Okay. This is a comment on my interview with David Berselli. It says, immensely useful, and from two of my favorite teachers. It's like when chocolate smashed into peanut butter. That's from Michael Hodge. And the story of Dr. Berselli sitting there next to people on the streets, OMG, crying face. Yeah, that was powerful. That was very poignant. That's the one thing I remember every time I think about that video. I remember that, and I remember his interactions with Mother Teresa. Ooh la la says, I just love it when Angelo says, it's just not. Whatever it is he's talking about at the time. And it's just not. And I believe him. Just not. I don't know what I mean by that. I'm having trouble referencing what I'm talking about when I say that. I think it was the famous words of Chad, when you think you're the one driving the vehicle, but really you're in the back of the trunk. Chad might have said that. I know Kogan said that one time in Australia. Someone here, this is from Hilu. Every time you say your birthright or you can go deeper, it feels like a permission. It's weird why we need a permission, but here it works that way. Thank you. So this is like again, sometimes I put these trigger warning videos up or whatever, and some people always get triggered, or some people even say you shouldn't do that. Like it's too much for people or something. But I don't agree at all. I think they're actually really valuable, and they're valuable for this reason, because some people are just naturally oriented to surrender. They're not oriented to learning about Dharma and arguing about Dharma topics online. They're oriented to just letting go. They don't give a shit what the terms mean. They don't know anything about doctrine. But that's a very, very steep process. A lot of intensity comes up, and a lot of intense emotions come up, and existential terror comes up. That's why I do this. So when people watch the video and they go, oh my God, that's what it is. It's that. Like, I'm not going crazy. That's just deep shadow stuff. So I do it to normalize that can happen, and often does in this process, and that it's okay. That's where this goes. I probably also do it to help ease it into people's consciousness, because some people are really resistant to this part of it. They're resistant to shadow, and honestly, a lot of times don't know it. They tend to be people who argue about doctrine a lot. I've worked with people who took a couple years before they really dropped into deep shadow, and they were very surprised. And I can remember one specific person recently telling me, he's like, I really didn't like when you used to talk about shadow work. I thought it was like, why are you talking about this? What a waste of time. Like, he's like, no, I want to learn about enlightenment. I don't want to care about shadow stuff, until he found himself in deep shadow. And then he's like, okay, now I get exactly what you mean. And I can see how it was blocking me from the deeper insights. Right. So that's another reason I talk about it, is just to kind of prepare you. And your ego won't like to hear it, and it'll even argue that that's maybe not even going to happen. But some part of you hears it, and it's like, it's slowly digesting the fact that you're going to have to go through some intense stuff you've been avoiding. That's why I do it. And I don't do it all the time. I make happy, crunchy granola vibe videos too, but I also sometimes get real about shadow work. This is from Bill Romas. Hoping this saves people a lot of time, frustration, anguish, etc. So close it is overlooked. So close it is overlooked. I agree. That was from one of my shorts. This is a comment that says, they're quoting me, the thoughts are a reflection. Then they say, as Rupert Spira states, thought is the circus clown that takes the bow after the performance of others, of other thoughts. This is also the experience here. Thought is always several steps behind knowing. Totally. Rupert Spira has a video about this, a really well done video where he talks about the illusion of choice and how thoughts make it seem like there's a choice occurring. Or I'll say it this way. They make it seem like there's a chooser. But he breaks down very clearly how that's not the case in a precise way. It's a really cool video. I can't think of the title, though. I haven't watched it for a few years. Okay, this is the last one I'll answer. This is from T Eternal. Dear Angelo, please answer. 2 pleases. Okay, I will. Why do I feel like that not fully realizing that there is not anything I need to protect is the very thing holding me back? Why do I feel like that not fully realizing that there is not anything I need to protect is the very thing holding me back? Oh, I mean, it's good insight, right? That sense of like defensiveness, defending, holding back from life, backing away, holding your ground. It's all tied into the illusion of time, right? In a sense, it's thought-based, but it has a strong pull, right? So why do you feel like not fully recognizing that there's nothing to defend there is what's holding you back? Well, first of all, I would question every assumption in the question, right? Is something really holding you back? How do you know? How do you know something's holding you back? What does that mean? Holding you back from what? You can deconstruct the experience somewhat. Where do you find holding back, right? Is that a thought? Is it a sensation? Is it something in between? Is it both? Where do you find it in the body? Essentially, I would say this whole sentence is a thought that's being believed. Get rid of that whole sentence, the whole thought that believes all that's going on, and just find out what's really happening underneath. Sensation, emotion, resistance, what's there? Restlessness. I'll read the rest. In other words, I should be able to just be as vulnerable as I truly want. No, incorrect. Anytime you use should in a sentence, you really got to question like what's going on there. So I should be able to be just as vulnerable as I truly want without any limitations, right? No. You should reasonably expect to be as vulnerable as is available for you right now. You should also reasonably expect that it's going to change. You may feel really open one moment, you may feel closed the next. And that's great because it gives you something to ask or to inquire about what's happening. Why do I feel so closed suddenly? What changed? Did I interact with somebody? What was it, right? So I think what's happening here is like setting up unreasonable expectations and then immediately getting discouraged by seeing that those expectations don't seem to be happening, right? But you can't just be as vulnerable as you want to be right now. You can be as vulnerable as you can. You can make an intention to be more vulnerable. You can make an intention to investigate what's blocking you. But you can't just like say, I'm going to snap my fingers and be 100% vulnerable. That will just frustrate you, right? Yeah, that's mostly what I want to say to this. It's just some thoughts that are getting you caught up here. But vulnerability is, I would say it's always accessible, but the part that sticks out is as vulnerable as I want to be. There's always an ability to be vulnerable, but there may not be an ability to go all the way to the bottom and feel everything and see all of your motivations and see your fixation points in this moment. It probably won't happen, but it will happen over time if you keep going back and being willing to be vulnerable. And when you don't feel vulnerable, instead of looking at what should be and what shouldn't be and what you think the problem is, that's all intellectual. You actually go, okay, well, I'm having trouble being vulnerable right now. Why? What am I feeling right now? Oh, I feel some fear, actually. What is that related to? Just inquire into what's happening right now. And then tomorrow you may feel suddenly vastly more vulnerable. And then 2 weeks later, you might feel a little less vulnerable. And in that case, great. Is there something blocking it? Is there something in the way of me being just more open right now? These are the kind of questions that I would ask and how I would work with this. So thank you all for your comments, your questions, your funny troll comments. I didn't read any, but I got a couple funny troll comments today. Yeah. Thanks.